Hello and welcome to Recalibrating with me, Sharee Johnson, where you'll hear healthcare professionals and others sharing their stories of recalibrating life when the unexpected happened. As a psychologist and a coach, I've been listening deeply to people's stories for 35 years, and I've come to believe two things about people. The first is having witnessed so many incredible stories of hope, adaptability, and human capacity, I truly believe that we are all capable of so much more than we really think we are. In times of challenge, humans have demonstrated that over and over again. Here on the Recalibrating podcast, you'll get to hear amazing stories of healthcare professionals and others pivoting, overcoming, and recalibrating their lives. The second thing that the research and my experiences as a psychologist have shown me is that humans need each other. We need people. When we have support around us, when we tell each other our stories, when we connect through the reality of living our lives, we do so much better than when we pull back and hide what's really going on for us. Together on this podcast, we're going to unearth and amplify what helps us as humans individually and collectively to recalibrate in ways that help us change, grow, adapt, even surprise ourselves when life throws us a curveball. This podcast offers you the chance to be inspired and encouraged to meet the unexpected in your life with grace, skills, and a belief in your own human capacity. Life is full of opportunities to recalibrate with agency, the right mindset, the right resources, and the right community. Today's storyteller is Dr. Andrew Green. Andrew works as an anaesthetist on the Mornington Peninsula and in Gippsland, both in Victoria in Australia. Andrew started his medical career as a general practitioner and a GP anaesthetist, but went on to train as a specialist anaesthetist. He particularly enjoys looking after children and their families at the challenging time of surgery. People who work with Andrew say that he's fun and that humour is usual. Andrew enjoys co-facilitating and being part of our Recalibrate community. It's an absolute honour today to welcome Dr. Andrew Green to Recalibrating with Sharee Johnson. Hi Andrew, how are you going?
I'm really well, Sharee. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very pleased to see you and to have this chance to talk with you about your journey and the opportunities you've had in your life to recalibrate. So welcome to Recalibrating with me. You've had a change of specialty, and I think that's very interesting for our audience to hear about that journey. So let's start there. You work as an anaesthetist now. You supervise and guide out some of our trainee anaesthetists, but you haven't always been an anaesthetist. So would you tell us a little bit about that story?
I started as a general practitioner in my medical career, and I think that was primarily because it was hard for me to choose a specialty. I felt like, I could do a bit of everything. And working in a rural setting, felt that airway skills and anesthetics would be a useful sideline. And I trained as a GP anaesthetist fairly early in my general practice career, and quickly decided that there was one part of my week that I really liked and the other part that I found really hard going. And so moved on to retrain as a specialist anaesthetist, which has been a good decision. And I kind of feel like the change was probably a symptom of having, a need to change rather than, the movement into a better place, so to speak. So I can explain a little bit more about what I think that means. And, I just found general practice really hard going for a whole lot of reasons. High turnover, constant connecting with a new patient every several minutes was so taxing. And I've got great respect for people who can do it, but I struggled. And anesthetics is kind of polar opposites from that. One patient at a time, a small team around us, and a very clear goal. And I think in reality, looking back, the general practice was a burnout for me. very early in my career, and the change, was needed. But really, it took me further away from the opportunity to connect with patients.
Mm. Okay, well, let's come back around to that in a minute. It sounds like it was valuable, though, to be able to try out. You had, as a procedural, as a GP who was doing some anesthetics, you had a chance to try that out. Did that help? That sounds like that helped the decision.
Yeah, as I say, I knew which part of my week I really enjoyed,
Mm.
which I thrived in.
And was it difficult to get onto the training program? How was that experience? I think that's changed over the last couple of decades a bit.
I think it's even harder now. The change for me was probably I was lucky. I had some connections, some contacts that really helped, and the rules have changed a bit since then as well. I have a number of people that I've almost really mentored through that very similar process, and they've had it a lot harder than I did. So I think it's become a lot harder to get onto specialty training programs across the board.
Mm. It's certainly one of the things that brings younger doctors to coaching, this struggle to determine which specialty to apply for, and then once they decide, the actual intensity of trying to get onto the program, and having to try multiple years in a row sometimes. Maybe won't go up that road. We need to get somebody from one of the colleges in to help us understand that a bit more. Um, as you rightly say, being a GP and being an anaesthetist are very different day-to-day jobs. Um, did you have to make some kind of mindset shift, or what was the recalibration that had to happen inside of you in terms of your identity? Still a doctor, but being quite a different set of tasks that you were now doing.
Um, it was a little bit of an effort to put down some because I had passed through the general practice training program, and it felt like abandoning a specialty where doctors were needed if general practice is a specialty. I'm sure general
I
practitioners
think we certainly say it's a specialty these days.
so to put that down and abandon a career that was in need of practitioners was something that took a little bit of effort, and was there was a bit of sadness around that, and perhaps some guilt. um, and in reality, while I was doing both, yeah, the part of my week that felt more uplifting, just to sort of lean into that wasn't as hard as it might have been.
So Andrew, can we come back to that shift of now you're working with a small team, you're seeing one patient at a time. Many of the anaesthetists that I've worked with describe, the first thing they say is, I'm a proceduralist and I like checklists, I like working through a procedure. And so can you talk a little bit about maybe the ups and the downsides of that? And you made a comment that you perhaps moved away in that shift from the connecting with people. Maybe say some more about that to us.
I kind of agree. I think anesthetics is it's very task focused. We're lucky in that I think we're lucky. We get handed a job that's very well defined, and we very much know by the end of our interaction with a patient, or even a day's work, whether or not we've achieved what we set out to do. And to I think it's different to general practice, is much more nebulous, and we go home at the end of the day. It's easier to put things down. I believe it's easier to put things down and tie it up neatly and be done. And there is a small team of people around us that I can get to know fairly well. The turnover of patients is less. And the other thing about our interaction with patients, and this is one of the wake up moments for me, really, was coming to realize that it's almost like there's a watershed moment in the giving of an anesthetic, in my mind, that we can talk to the patient and do our pre-anesthetic assessment and everything, but it's once we actually start the process of, it's almost like put in the intravenous cannula and start giving drugs, and the patient now becomes almost a part of the environment around us. And somehow, sounds difficult, but this is a descriptive term, becomes more like an item rather
Mm.
than a person, especially once they become asleep.
Mm.
And I had that conversation with a surgeon I'd worked with a lot one day, and pointed out the way it sort of almost depersonalizes the patient. And he made the observation that it may be that it's at least in part necessary to allow us to do the quite inhumane things it might be seen that we do to people's bodies. And that if anything, that felt, realizing that was an issue, or it became a, thing I became very consciously aware of, and it led to me. It was probably one of the moments that I sort of thought, wow, there could be a different way of doing things here.
Mm.
And it was I think one of the moments that led to me starting to think, what would that be? How would it be different?
Mm. How long ago do you think that was?
It was more than several years, yeah. Um,
Or how far was it into your anesthetic career, I guess?
um, Yeah, a good few years into being a full-time anaesthetist.
Mm.
It was almost like when I went into anesthetics, it was a relief to not need to connect with people every several minutes. And then in realizing, what that meant in terms of my opportunity to connect with people, was like, again, like an eye-opening moment. So, you know, it was an opportunity, I think, to start thinking how or what would I do differently.
Mm. Yeah, I wonder, listening to you, I'm reflecting on that you used the word burnout before, that when you were making that shift from being a GP and starting to think about, actually, I could do more of the thing that I'm enjoying the most, which was anesthetics, that there's a feeling of burnout. Did you have a sense of being burnt out then, or is that a looking back understanding?
Yeah, I don't think I had any idea what burnout was back then, but looking back, I think there were enough signs that that's what it was, putting that down and going into something else. And you wondered if that was, a time of recalibration. And like I say, it may be that that was actually a symptom that I needed to do some recalibrating. Um,
Mm.
and that I think that depersonalizing, just seeing people as, a procession of people that I needed to get through the day,
Mm.
rather than, opportunity to, connect with people, was a sign of that as well.
And then that period of during the early years of being an anaesthetist, um, that separation or that depersonalizing was just more of that evidence of that burnout experience, or that transition back to something else.
Yeah, even more so. And I think looking back, it was a fact that I didn't have the skills that I might have needed,
Mm.
to do things differently. In a funny way, that conversation with that surgeon, if I think about it, it might be that was, just cracking the foundations ever so slightly of the old way of doing it, and to be able to have that kind of conversation with him about how it felt or what it meant to have a patient in front of us that, we were both looking at as, being perhaps, less of a person than we might like to think of them,
Mm.
was to be able to have that conversation with a surgeon like that might have been just the very start of realizing that there's a different way of doing things, being able to, connect with him over that kind of a thought. Um,
Yeah, and his response was kind of reflective as well. I love the idea that the two of you were, in a safe enough space, I suppose, that you were able to make that noticing out loud. And that is a part of what's important about reflective practice, isn't it? That we can see more clearly, we can say out loud and explore or wonder about something. I'm also wondering, listening to you, what it was like to go back to being a reg. Lots of doctors say, "Oh, I couldn't change now. I couldn't go back into the hospital system at a later stage in their career and become a registrar again." What was that like?
yeah, that was definitely a challenge. There are a few stories about how, that I struggled with that a little bit, and particularly about I think what you're talking about is being being a registrar, being a trainee, being a junior again, having been an independent, practitioner, um, might have a little bit to do with how I see myself and how other people see me and the extent to that which that matters.
Mm.
And it could be if I look back on it now, and it's easy for me because I'm a long way through the training with all of the, privilege that gives me. But in reality, if I look back, I was doing something that, I enjoyed. I was lucky enough to be giving anaesthetics, albeit as a trainee now rather than as an independent GP anaesthetist. And even if there were times that I felt like people were, I was at a lower station, I was doing what I wanted to be doing. So,
Mm. So there's a sort of a balancing out, or that because you were enjoying the learning that you were doing and the opportunity that you were having, there was enough of that, enough enjoyment and curiosity and learning to counteract, if you like, the bump back down the hierarchy.
yep, for sure. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. What would you? Sorry, you look like you're going to say something else.
No, I think I was going to add that, really it could be that if that was difficult, it might also, one of the skills I think I've learned a little bit is that, a big part of what might have made it difficult might have been the story I told myself about,
Mm.
being at a lower level, even if nobody else was looking at me that way, and being able to catch that and put that aside.
Mm. Mm.
Maybe I was beating myself up worse than other
Mm.
people were.
Mm. What stage of life were you up to? You've got a family. Did you have young children at that stage when you made that change?
Yeah, I did. I think both of my children were probably at very early school or preschool age.
Mm.
Um, and I was married to my first wife at that time. And um, I remember my mother said to me one time, "You're studying so hard, just take care of the impact on the people around me and my family."
Mm.
Which were fairly, sage words. And I've got two ended marriages since then, and I've got some gratitude to those ladies for what I've learned. But there was a price to pay for all of that time that
Mm.
I've spent. Yeah,
Mm. I wonder if I'm wondering whether I ask you what you would share with that younger self now, looking back, or maybe with a young doctor. As I said at the beginning, you are working with young doctors in training now as their supervisor. What do you take out of those experiences, that change, and your mother's comment? What do you bring with you in terms of sharing with those younger doctors now when they're facing these kinds of dilemmas of the toll or the ask of work in the rest of their life?
yeah. I can only really speak from my experience because I can't tell them how to do things for themselves.
Mm.
But the answer to that question seems fairly easy to me, and that is that, really life is a journey and it's about the journey. And the difficult times are the things that have made me realize that something's not working. And the things that haven't been working are, as I've said before, a symptom that I need to think about what I could or should be doing differently.
Mm.
Um, and I guess, I'll probably, if I look back, think, well, each of those difficult times was, something to get through and a trigger and a journey along the way, but it was still part of living life.
Mm. It sounds like the wisdom of experience, doesn't it? I think there's an element. Often people ask me, why we don't do the things that we do in our work at Coaching for Doctors with younger doctors, and we are available to younger doctors. We certainly are working with younger doctors, and there's some kind of developmental arc, I think, here that some of what we do requires a readiness, and maybe earlier in careers, probably not just doctors. I think all health professionals, there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of practical things to get across, and there's a lot of life goals, getting married, having small children, things like that that take our attention. And perhaps it's only in mid-career or when we've jumped through some of those hurdles that we have the space to do this kind of reflection. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I think there's a large range of different skill sets,
Mm,
different mindsets, and it might be that we've got to be ready for that transition.
mm,
Or the tools got to be, useful at the time.
mm,
It might be in the setting that I've chosen a certain um, a career or specialty, that there is an awful lot of, stuff and material to learn, and I've just got to put the effort into doing that. And I think specifically junior doctors are often feeling like, if I work hard enough and make sure I've got all of the skills that go with my specialty at hand, then life will get easier because I'll be okay. I'll be a qualified anaesthetist, and then, I won't worry anymore.
mm,
But over time, I've come to realize that, it doesn't matter how good I get at my job, there'll always be something that will cause me stress or distress. And
mm,
the additional skill set that I need is how do I handle that
mm,
stress or wherever that distress is coming from. And it might not have anything to do with having, all this, top level skills of being a good anaesthetist.
mm, the art and science of medicine and life. So, who have been the people? There would have been, you might want to name them, or you can just name their role or how they came into your life. Who have been the people that have helped you make these discoveries or helped you manage these transition points?
Um, there'd be groups of people as well as individuals. So I think there was definitely a time in my life that it wasn't just work that I was struggling with, and at that point in time, as I've said, just the impulse to think how could things be different, that just trying harder at what I was doing wasn't working. And one of the things I went looking for, and this has been a core behavior or activity over years, and it's even one of the things that I call them my planks, the things I need to do regular, and that sort of underpin or my being well, is hanging with the men. And I have been sitting with men in men's circles for years. Um, so there'd be groups of men that have always been there as a backup. Um, and some of them are still there over years. And, um, in particular, there was a time that I was really struggling with a bad outcome at work. And that went on for years, all of the repercussions. And one of those men was very wise and said, "You doctors you don't get your feelings out very easily, do you?" And it occurred to me that having a group of doctors around me that understood, what we did and how it came up for us, and were a safe enough place to do that kind of work was as important. It sounds odd, but sitting in a men's circle is as it sounds. We get together, on an evening, we lock the door, we turn the lights down, we light a candle, we sit in a circle, and we talk about how we feel.
Yeah.
And it just sounds really so alien to a lot of people, and certainly for a group of doctors to do that kind of thing. But it's been pivotal to me to find those people at work who understand and also understand the work. And it led to me trying to create similar circles of doctors, which was really hard going. Like I said, to find a group of doctors like that.
Mm,
And it led to me being pointed towards Recalibrate, the program, and finding that, such a group actually, is possible.
mm,
And so that group has been, and, through that, as part of that, of course, coaching, which is, slightly different. Um, and, certainly has been pretty pivotal to me as well.
mm. I wonder if we'd just stay with the men's group for a little bit longer, because I think there is a bit of mystery for people who haven't been involved in a men's group, probably for men and women, wondering what goes on there. Can you say a little bit more about? We'll talk about the gatherings with the doctors in a little bit, but can you just give us a bit more flavour of the kinds of men who were there, just to normalise or kind of help people understand literally what that is. You're together for an hour or two, and the men come from where? How do you find each other?
Um, so we actually constructed our own men's group initially, and it was an offshoot of, some larger groups. And there's quite a variety and range of men. And the key thing is it's by choice. And there's a degree of commitment and structure to it. So when we started the group that we had, there were four of us that committed to showing up every week, and it was just the four of us every Wednesday night for 2 years. And barely one of us missed a single week, just to build that safety and connection that would allow us to actually really start going deep on the stuff we were struggling with.
Mm.
And it formed a really safe space then to start, advertising it, and men would come along and decide if it was for them. Big range of people with different reasons for being there. Some people, and I know it was so for me at times, showing up literally just to be present and hold the space for the other men that were struggling more.
Mm.
And there were times that, I just needed to get there on a Wednesday night because, I was struggling and needed to let it out.
Mm.
And the fact that it had structure led to safety as well, that I knew how it was going to go down to a great extent, that, I knew there was confidentiality and a whole lot of other reasons that would make it. Um, and if I talk about it, it might be people say that's all a bit mystical or a bit, woo woo. But I'll tell you what, it could be really bloody blokey as well.
I think the thing to notice is that you were intentionally creating a safe place, so there was this confidentiality agreement, and also you were intentionally saying this is a place that we can talk about our feelings, or we can learn to talk about our feelings. You don't have to come fully formed knowing how to do it. Um, but we're not only going to talk about the footy and the races and the sort of stereotypical Australian male conversation, that there is room here to have these different kinds of conversation. And that was a clearly stated intention. That's the thing that seems important to notice from my listening.
Well, I might almost say I haven't got anything to add to that because you're completely right.
Mm.
But on just to reiterate what you said, the space to learn to talk about how we feel, because
Mm.
it wasn't a skill set that I had,
Mm.
and it's become pretty core and central now. And to actually get the opportunity to practice that in the presence of, other men. And you're right, that's potentially not stereotypical,
Mm.
but, what if it could be?
Mm. Yeah. So you identified or noticed that there were some other things you might learn how to do, and you found a way to do that. And what difference has it made in have you developed that skill set, and has it proven to be something that's been useful?
Um, I think so. In fact, I think one of the most useful things for me now is the opportunity just to notice what's going on with me, maybe think about what's going on with the other person, um, and being able to recognize the feeling as it comes up rather than just be driven by it. Um, so how does that show up? For starters, I think there is evidence of that from the people around me. For instance, I've got adult children now, and they used to rate the degrees of, Andrew angry, and they actually give it a rating scale. And they say it's a long time since they've seen, the higher levels,
Mhm.
which feels pretty nice.
I'm going to say, how do you feel about that? You can see the relief on your face.
Yeah, it feels pretty nice. And I'm going to own it because I've had more than a couple of instances from quite different parts of my life where people have said, how calm I seem or how still I am. And I like being that way. And
Mm.
I think it comes from being able to, notice something happening and, even my response or my reaction to it on the inside, but not feel like I need to do anything with it straight away.
Mm.
And, a big part of Recalibrate is mindfulness, which I think is the first time that I'd come across that term and what it was all about. But it's just central now for me. And I think that mindfulness is about, the noticing of what's coming up on the inside, being able to actually physically feel my feelings. Some of the work I did in the men's circles was around being able to name and label feelings. And in years gone past, I recognized that, apart from, maybe, really pleasant feelings, there was so much stuff that was difficult that I just felt it all in the same way and couldn't really name it or label it. And being able to have a space where I could actually experience that and sit with it and realize that I could let it be there and it wouldn't do me any harm to have that feeling. And in a way, be able to just, I would say, let it be there, let it go,
Mm.
has been a central skill. So, it doesn't drive me when I'm, have something happen around me anymore. Not in, well, like I talk about this, but, there's instances.
You're still human.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, the psychological things that you're pointing to is discernment. So, this discernment of where in my body is this and how is it different to something else? That anxiety feels different to anger, and anger feels different to resentment. And, these things might be in the same part of our body or they might be different. And how do we interpret those signals in real time? I think there's such a valuable skill set for people who work under pressure, not just doctors, but anyone who's working under some kind of time pressure or expectation pressure, who's able to discern in the moment, in the heat, what is this signal, what does it mean, and how do I regulate that or manage that? Now has a whole lot of other choices available to them in terms of their next steps or their next behavior. I think that's what you're describing, this ability to name. We say we name it to tame it when we're talking about our emotions. This ability to name something and then, pause long enough momentarily to be able to remember that there is a choice here in how we react. I think that's what you're describing in your experience.
100%. I don't know how much more to say about it. Even in my professional practice, in the pointiest end of, critical stuff going on, and, a lot of people in medical practice will recognize there are sometimes that the crisis is so severe it doesn't seem like there's even time to think. And I think that skill is applicable there. And, it amazed me one day when I caught myself in the middle of managing quite a serious crisis in an operating theatre. And, I caught myself just close my eyes for a second and take a deep breath
Mm.
and be able to turn around and go, right, what next?
Mm.
And when I noticed that I'd done it, and it's almost giving me shivers now thinking about it, um, the next instance that there was a crisis, I made a decision to do that same thing.
Mm.
And, it's not uncommon for people to turn and say, you just seem so calm.
Mm.
And, it's not like I am every minute, but, it's a skill that can be practiced. And I don't think it's trained as part of anesthetic training.
Mm. Well, wouldn't that be amazing to think that it is embedded in the training from the get-go? I mean, you just use one of my favourite words, or at least one of the words I say most often, which is practice.
Mhm.
And I think that's disappointing for people sometimes to think, I've got to, what do you mean I've got to practice, taking a breath? I've been breathing however many thousands of times every day. Why do I have to practice it? But it's this intentional awareness, this awareness that I can take a breath in this moment. You've probably heard me say before that a ED doctor said to me one day, there's not actually that many life and death moments in reality. I think we do well to remember that. Of course, there are those events in medicine every day, all around the world, and there are a lot of mundane, ordinary, routine moments in between where we can practice noticing where we are, what's the emotion in our body, can I take one breath? And if we do that, it's much more accessible to us than in those emergency situations. Mm. You told me a few years ago, you were in your 40s, let's not try and guess what number, that you hadn't taken any holidays, that you didn't take holidays. And you were about to go off on quite a fabulous holiday to Europe at that stage. It was a new experience for you to step out of working lots of hours every week to go on holidays. What happened? What changed your mind and that you decided you'd go for a holiday?
Well, I had to say I was bad at taking holidays. I know that I was, and in fact, I think again my family probably suffered, and there was a point in time that I'd said to the kids, "Look, let's just make sure that I schedule at least some holidays," and they knew that second week of the September school holidays and the first week of January we would go away. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not much.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, you're right, that instance that I went away on that holiday, and I think it was while I was away, I actually realized I had never in the length of my career taken 3 full weeks off at a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And it was while I was away I realized that. And I think it came from, there was actually another holiday a year later as well, which was hard because I'd just gotten back and my partner was talking to me saying, "Oh, I'm just starting to plan our next trip." And I've gone, "Hold on a minute, we've just done 3 weeks." And, you know, but it was, I think it was on the second trip that we went for, again, 3 weeks, and this one was South America. And I started to actually be intentional about saying, actually I get to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And being on that trip, and I think I was standing under Christ the Redeemer in Rio, which is somewhere I'd always wanted to go. We went to Machu Picchu on that trip as well. It was a pretty good one. But standing there and realizing that I was here in this place because I wanted to be, not to keep somebody else happy, and not even for anything other than just the pure joy of being here in this moment. And that was quite a wake up moment to sort of realize that I was perhaps not indispensable, that the things I wanted to do were things that I was able to schedule and could do, and that living life now rather than saying, "Oh, one day I'll go to Christ the Redeemer in Machu Picchu." And so what unfolded after that, and I wonder if you're hoping to ask, was about the 3 months of long service leave that I took last year, and the fact that that was, as you've alluded to earlier, a practice, an opportunity to say, what would it be like if I just said to all of the surgeons and people writing rosters at all the different hospitals and places that I work at that I'm going to be away for, months, and that's from this date to this date. And I very, just specifically said, "I'm sorry, just if you need me on a list on that time, I won't be there. You just have to cover me. And I hope you'll still have me back when I get back."
Mm.
And that was the practice,
Mm.
to put it all down and think, okay, who am I now, and what am I going to, and am I still wanted and needed? And yeah.
And so, what have you learned? Have you, it almost sounds like you've got a more three-dimensional version of Andrew happening now.
Yeah, how I spent the time was amazing, because I literally threw a swag in the boot of my Ford Falcon and drove across the Nullarbor and up the west coast, and I did it myself. And my 15-year-old daughter joined me for a week as part of the trip. It was much more it was much more complex than that, but that's pretty much it. And my partner flew over and met me, and we drove back together. But the bulk of the trip was just spent alone.
Mm-hmm.
And we've alluded to how important mindfulness is, and I just spent hours at a time driving, not listening to anything, just looking at where I was, um, and I think some of the best highlights of the trip was just the space in between all the places I was going to, and seeing what came up, and feeling safe just to see what came up, and what was there, and not be always doing stuff to try and shove it down or ignore it, or busyness, which is, I think, how so many of us, and to me that would have been a really difficult place to be in years gone by. I would always be thinking I need to be doing something for other people. This holiday should be for the children. I have to get back to be present for this list, on this day, and all of that kind of story that, was about, um, I guess, that other person that I probably was already.
Mm. Yeah, that need to be needed,
Hmm.
or liked. I mean, I meet both of those things in doctors of all kinds of specialties, all parts of their career. We use words like we say, oh, people pleasing or perfectionism, or really there's this core thing in us all that we want to be seen and heard and valued. And, you're describing beautifully the individual work we can do to have those experiences. I think, the the next step, the exciting step, is when we can collectively or organisationally, systemically have that more embedded in medical training and medical practice, that, where we want to be seen and heard and valued. And when we feel that, we give a lot of discretionary effort, we have a lot of meaning in our work, other things flow from that are useful.
I really agree with what you're saying, and I think there's some more as well, and that is that a lot of the time we pull ourselves out of shape so that we're trying to be what will make us needed, wanted, and appreciated, so that we feel like we're doing a good job, or that our job is secure, or that we'll be allowed to progress.
Mm.
Um, and how would it be if I could learn just to get very familiar with who I am and what I need to be, just as happy as I can be, and that our workplaces and our employers and our training programs might know that if they want us to be committed to our jobs and everything, that they might look for a way to really be helping us, get that from our work, rather than requiring us to fit and tick their boxes. That they're looking for ways to get us, as happy with, in a role that satisfies our own needs. And then, maybe we won't burn out. Maybe we'll be even more committed, and maybe we'll work, harder and better. And
Mm. Yes, another phrase that I like, be the employer of choice. So, can we go back again, Andrew, a little bit to your efforts? You were looking to try and make these circles of doctors to find ways for doctors to come together, and you had a pretty decent crack at that when we first met in 2019. You were coming to learn about what was our Recalibrate program, but you had already at that time been trying to convene these groups in one of your workplaces. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened? Because there is this general interest in doctor wellbeing, and lots of people saying, well, how do we do that? And I think one of the ways we might learn how to do that is by sharing with each other the experiments that we've run, our good ideas that might not have got off the ground as well as we wanted to, but that have compounded and brought us to this place now with our, we've come to where we are because of those experiments. Can you tell us what you envisaged, what you tried to do?
yeah, so I mentioned the men's circles and the fact that, they had a fair degree of structure to them, which led to some safety, and there was um, it led it led it led to me thinking, well, how would it be if, as doctors, we could, get together people who also needed that space and had an understanding of uh, the stress or the things that we were struggling with in work specific sense. And so I kind of felt like modeling it on the men's circles to start with, invitation. It was fairly wide invitation to, in particular to start with, the same craft group that I was working with. So, I started at one of the hospitals where I was predominantly employed, and, invited almost everyone from the anaesthetic team. And I had some support from some of the men in the men's circles that actually, traveled to regional Victoria to help, facilitate or co-facilitate the circles that we were running. And we ran quite a few of them over a period of time. And I guess the thing was that it was not that, it felt like it wasn't that easy for people who knew each other at work to get together and, open up about, feeling and stuff in a situation that they might not have felt completely safe.
Were you trying to meet at the workplace, or were you meeting after work?
No, it was outside of work. So we had the meetings in, private circumstance on our own time. And so it was, and it was specifically not, it was not intended to be about work related, about specific cases even, although obviously in a lot of cases, meetings,
Mm.
a lot of situations, meetings contain, clinical information and its context.
Mm.
But it wasn't, it was really intended to be about, how these things impacted us. And I, I think, we've got to be ready for that kind of space. And I think there's a lot of people came along to try it out, but felt that it wasn't for them or didn't need it. And to try and build that sort of thing, I think to build a container and to have some continuity and sense that people feel at home, it requires people to get to know each other in that space and some ongoing. And it was just hard to get it running and have enough attendance over a period of time. And for me, it really it led to me when I heard about Recalibrate, realizing that almost from another angle, you were starting to create something similar, or I see that there is this space. I haven't built it as such as been part of it.
Mm.
So it does exist, in short. And I think the thing is, it's a much wider community, and sitting in that situation with people I have to then look at the next day at work, probably is one of the things that makes it a bit easier.
Mm. Yeah, I think we went with the Recalibrate program. We ran the pilot in 2018. You came the first year that we were cold to the market, as we say. That we had gone out saying, "Okay, we've got this thing. Is anybody else interested?" And we'd been up, well, we since then have been up a similar road, in that I really imagined that it might have been something we offered to hospitals and delivered inside of hospitals. But as we have delivered it going into our 9th year this year, you and I are starting our next program this Saturday with our new cohort, which is always an exciting moment. That people weren't sure about doing this work with people that they had to work with, and that the anonymity that is found in a group where you arrive all strangers, not knowing each other or not knowing each other well, and working in different systems and different departments, seems to foster better work in terms of the emotional work, at least, and the self-discovery and the exploring of awareness and what you notice that you hadn't noticed before, that you might be surprised to notice. That seems to happen more readily in these external to workplace groups. If anybody's listening to this and does think that, oh, let's try that in the hospital, I'd love to hear from you. But I really have moved away from that. I don't know.
I agree. I think there are individual doctors that I still work with or alongside or know well who have also done Recalibrate, and I think having having the opportunity to speak a similar language or have a similar understanding with them, but we're not always present in the same meetings or gatherings of the Recalibrate alumni. So that I think both things are true.
And certainly there is that ripple effect of people who've had value in the program telling their peers and their colleagues, and often others from the same workplace coming in different cohorts as that rolls out through the years. When you came to Recalibrate, it was a very female-dominated group. So you'd been in the men's circles, you'd been trying to create groups in health of men and women, and nursing, I think, and doctors and other techs or whoever. And then you arrived at Recalibrate in this very female-dominated world. I still think you were quite brave at that stage. How do you remember that? What was that experience like? And what was it that got you over the line, that helped you think, this might help me in this transition or this work that I'm doing at this part of my life?
Um, The first thing that comes to mind is I don't think it had a huge impact on me that I was, the only male in that group doing Recalibrate at that time. So it was okay for me, which is not to say it wouldn't be a problem for some.
Yes.
Um, and the second part of your question, I think, just eludes me. What was that?
Too wordy. What was it that brought you there? What was the thing that had you feel like, I'm going to do this program?
Um, I think really what it was, well, it was a conversation with you that got me across the line, and it was pointed to a common friend of ours who, Sarah Wilmot, who has sadly passed, and won't ever um, forget that it was her who pamphlet, and we did it together.
Mm.
Um, and so that I think got me across the line, but in reality, I think I was looking for a way. Was looking for a way to bring what I felt was, that ability to get through the difficult feeling, do that on with the context of the stuff that, was coming up at work.
So when you did come to recalibrate, what was the thing at that time that got you helped you decide, yep, I'm going to do this program?
Was definitely a phone call, a conversation sold me and made me realize it would be very much worth my while. And in addition, I had been struggling with some difficult events at work, and having that space to work through that, or the safe space and the colleagues who were speaking the same language. And, very quickly realized that that was available. Specifically, a very difficult event that went on for years, of, repeatedly coming up, and the feelings that would come up when similar events happened at work,
Mm.
and practicing being able to have those difficult feelings, but also needing the space and the people around me that could, number one, understand the events and, the way it went down, and also be a safe space to talk about, um, and, that repeating asset to have that, that community.
Mm. Mm.
So I got the impression that was available, from starting, and I was looking for it, and, it's been that way.
Mm. Your internet's a bit weird again. Mm. We'll keep going because we're nearly finished and we'll just cross our fingers. But I do want to talk about Sarah. So since you've mentioned her, I think one of our colleagues who has sadly since passed, we might dedicate this episode to her memory. Sarah Wilmot was in that group in your cohort as well, and the two of you worked together some of the time. Was she a part of how you found your way into that group?
Yeah, Sarah actually showed me the pamphlet and
Mm.
do this, or said that she was doing it, and I said that looks, exactly what I need to be doing, and led to me calling. So I'll never forget that she was, pretty much getting me where I am now.
Mm.
And there's a couple of other things that, you were saying that she said earlier. You were saying about, that space between, feeling something coming up and choosing how to respond. And that is, I think, comes from a quote that she always pointed to, and I can never hear the name Victor Man's for meaning, because he said that it's in the space between um, the stimulus and the response that, we get to choose, and finding that space. And Sarah, I just can always remember her saying that.
Mm. Yeah. So we'll put the Viktor Frankl book in the show notes for people, a very well-known psychiatrist from the Second World War, who, many speakers reference. I think that idea of the last human freedom is what he called it, that space between the stimulus and response. Nobody can take that away from you. We just need to get familiar with it and remember it's there. Yeah. Well, valet to Sarah, she certainly made a big impact on me, and I'm very pleased and proud to have included her in our Recalibrate community. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot more I could talk with you about, Andrew. We've got some glitches happening with our internet, and I think we're near the end of the conversation. So I'll just ask you, in the course of our conversation today, has there been anything that's come up for you that you'd like to point to, you think has been important in your I guess, the opportunities you've had during your life to recalibrate?
I think what comes up for me right now might be also occurred in the invitation to talk to you here in this way. It might be that I think in times gone by, I might very much have thought, well, why me? Is the story I've got to tell actually that useful? And I think the change has occurred over time, that that whole imposter syndrome thing is just evaporating faster and faster. And it's like, well, this is just me. I'm okay just to tell my story, and, it's okay as it is. And so be it. And, it could be some gratitude for the chance to tell it, and, be satisfied that it's good enough.
Mm. Well, I think we certainly value having you in our Recalibrate alumni community, and it's been, one of the gifts for me that you've joined in facilitating, co-facilitating some of our Recalibrate groups. And I think, the learning side by side with you has been, a great gift in my life that's couldn't have been anticipated. I'm very, very grateful for your contribution to the things I've learned about medicine and how we can recalibrate. And I'm very grateful for your time today. So thank you for all that you've shared with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed Dr. Andrew Green's story today. He's led a very interesting medical life in terms of changing specialties. It's really quite precious to hear him talking about the work that he's done in the men's group. And, he said to me when we finished recording, I really don't think that I would have made the progress that I've made in understanding my emotions and being able to work with them without the men's group. So I really hope that you, piqued your curiosity if you're a male listening to this episode, and really want to encourage everybody to think about what Andrew said in terms of being able to look internally and to name what's happening, to notice that in your body. And then he very often says, when we're in conversation, something that he's grateful for. And we haven't talked on the podcast yet much about gratitude. I just want to notice his comment at the end about feeling some gratitude for who he is and where his journey has brought him to, and that who he is perfectly okay. And just to recognize the deep humanity and the deep humility in that statement, that we can all find a place to rest in the knowledge that, I'm okay, that we were all born worthy, and somehow along the way we seem to lose that. And I hear that a lot in medicine, that people are talking about, that they're not good enough. And the thing that really stands out from this conversation with Andrew is the readiness to practice, his willingness to be curious and to practice and to arrive at this place. And I think he would be the first to say there's no arriving, it's ongoing work, but to be in this place where he can often have the experience of saying, it's enough, I'm okay. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. I'm very grateful that we have Dr. Liz Wern and Dr. Andrew Green as our co-facilitators in Recalibrate. And if you are looking to learn some more about Recalibrate, please go to the coachingfordoctors.net.au website and register your name on the waitlist for our next cohort. And for now, may you be well. The content in this podcast is not intended to constitute or be a substitute for professional medical or psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your doctor or other qualified healthcare professional. This podcast represents the views of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of any entity we work with or for.